Store manager shouted at Black Mother. Seconds later, her daughter revealed the truth. The fluorescent lights of Morrison's grocery store buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the checkout lanes. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, and the afterwork rush had begun to thin. Sarah Chen, the store manager, stood near Register 3, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her jaw clenched in a way that made the tension visible from across the store. "I need you to leave. Now." Her voice cut through the ambient noise of shopping carts and scanner beeps like a knife through silk. Every head in the vicinity turned toward the source of the commotion. At the center of it all stood Monica Williams, a 34-year-old black woman in a wrinkled blue cardigan, her eyes wide with confusion and something that looked like fear. I don't understand," Monica said, her voice barely above a whisper. She clutched her worn leather purse against her chest like a shield. "What did I do?" "You know exactly what you did," Sarah's voice rose, sharp and accusatory. "I've been watching you for the past 20 minutes. The cameras don't lie, and neither do my eyes." Next to Monica stood her daughter, 8-year-old Lily, small for her age, with her mother's gentle eyes and a purple backpack decorated with butterflies. The little girl's hand found her mother's, squeezing tight. Lily's other hand held a small notebook, the kind with a rainbow unicorn on the cover that she carried everywhere. "Mommy." Lily's voice trembled. "What's happening?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as other shoppers began to stop and stare. Some pulled out their phones, others whispered to each other behind their hands. The checkout clerk at Register 3, a teenage boy named Marcus, had frozen mid-scan, his customers' groceries forgotten. This was the moment when everything could have gone differently. This was the moment when assumptions became accusations, when fear became fact in the mind of someone who had already decided what truth looked like. This was the moment that would change everyone involved, though none of them knew it yet. What Sarah Chen didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she'd never bothered to ask, was that Monica Williams had spent the last 3 days sitting by a hospital bed, watching her mother slip in and out of consciousness. She didn't know that Monica had lost her job 2 months ago when her company downsized. She didn't know that Monica had exactly $47 in her checking account, and that every item in her shopping basket had been carefully selected based on what was on sale and what would feed her daughter for the rest of the week. And she certainly didn't know what was written in Lily's notebook. But that revelation would come later, in a way that would force everyone in that store to confront their own assumptions about truth, about justice, and about the stories we tell ourselves to justify the way we treat others. Part 2. Background setup. 3 months earlier, Sarah Chen had stood in the regional manager's office, her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening to words that would change the trajectory of her career. "Sarah, your numbers are good, excellent, even," David Morrison had said, leaning back in his leather chair. He was the grandson of the store's founder, a man who'd never worked a retail shift in his life, but somehow found himself in charge of 23 locations across the state. "But we're seeing too much shrinkage. Loss prevention needs to be your top priority." Shrinkage, the corporate word for theft. The thing that ate into profit margins and threatened bonuses and made district managers nervous. "I've implemented new security measures," Sarah had replied, straightening in her chair. "We've reorganized the floor layout, improved camera coverage." "Not enough," David had cut her off with a wave of his hand. "The store on Maple Avenue reduced their shrinkage by 40% in 6 months. Know-how, increased vigilance, active prevention, being willing to make tough calls." Sarah had walked out of that office with a knot in her stomach and a singular mission: prove herself. At 39, she'd worked her way up from checkout clerk to store manager over 15 years. She'd sacrificed evenings, weekends, her marriage to a man who'd eventually left because he was tired of coming second to Morrison's grocery. She'd earned her position, and she'd be damned if she'd lose it because some shoplifters were cutting into the profit margin. The problem was that Sarah Chen had grown up comfortable. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where doors were left unlocked, where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest crime was Mrs. Patterson's cat using Mr. Henderson's garden as a litter box. She'd never had to worry about money, never had to count pennies, never had to understand what desperation looked like. So when she looked at Monica Williams that Tuesday evening, she didn't see a woman struggling. She saw a threat to her career. Monica Williams had different memories, ones that started in a cramped apartment in Chicago where her mother, Evelyn, had raised 3 children on a housecleaner's salary. Monica remembered her mother's hands, permanently wrinkled from years of cleaning solutions, and the way she'd count out exact change at the grocery store, sometimes putting items back when the total was too high. "Baby, when you have to choose," her mother had told her once, standing in a store not unlike Morrison's. You always choose food over pride. You feed your babies first, and you hold your head high no matter what anyone thinks. Monica had held her head high through college, working 3 jobs to graduate with a degree in social work. She'd held it high through her divorce from Lily's father, a man who'd loved the bottle more than he'd loved his family. She'd held it high through every struggle, every setback, every moment when it would have been easier to give up. But 3 days ago, she'd gotten the call that her mother had collapsed. A stroke, the doctors said. Severe, uncertain prognosis. Monica had driven 6 hours through the night with Lily sleeping in the backseat, had spent 72 hours in uncomfortable hospital chairs, drinking bad coffee and praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening. Now her mother was stable but unconscious. The doctors said to go home, get rest, come back tomorrow. But how could you rest when your mother, the woman who taught you everything about strength and survival, lay in a hospital bed, maybe dying? On her way home, Monica had stopped at Morrison's grocery because her refrigerator was empty and Lily needed to eat. She'd picked up bread, peanut butter, a small jar of jam, a carton of eggs, a half-gallon of milk, and a bunch of bananas. $32.17 worth of food. Affordable, necessary. She'd been counting her money, making sure she had enough when Lily had wandered off to look at something. She'd called her daughter back, distracted, tired, her mind still in that hospital room 6 hours away. That's when she'd noticed the store manager watching her. Lily Williams was 8 years old, but she noticed things that adults missed. She noticed when her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was sad even though she smiled. She noticed when the elderly man who lived below their apartment hadn't collected his mail in 3 days. Mommy had checked on him, and he'd been sick with the flu. She noticed the way people sometimes looked at her and her mother in stores, a certain kind of look that made her feel small even though she couldn't quite understand why. Lily had started keeping her notebook 4 months ago, after a girl at school had said that Lily's stories about their adventures weren't real because your mom can't afford to do all that stuff. It had hurt because it was true and not true at the same time. They didn't have a lot of money, but they were rich in other ways. So Lily had started documenting everything. Every act of kindness, every adventure, every moment that proved their life was full even if their bank account wasn't. In her notebook, written in careful 3rd-grade handwriting, were entries like, March 15, Mommy helped Mrs. Chen upstairs carry her groceries when she hurt her back. Mrs. Chen gave us cookies. April 3, we went to the Free Museum Day. Mommy taught me about ancient Egypt. We pretended to be archaeologists. May 22, Mommy gave her lunch to the homeless lady outside her work. She said she wasn't hungry, but I know she was. The notebook was Lily's treasure, proof that her mother was the best person in the whole world, proof that love mattered more than money, proof that their story was worth telling. She didn't know that this notebook, this simple collection of a child's observations, would soon become the most important evidence in a moment of crisis. Part 3. Gradual degradation. The tension in Morrison's grocery that Tuesday evening didn't spring from nowhere. It had been building, moment by moment, assumption by assumption, for the past 20 minutes. Sarah Chen had first noticed Monica Williams when she'd entered the store. There was nothing unusual about that. Sarah prided herself on being aware of every customer. But something about Monica had triggered her heightened vigilance. Maybe it was the tired look in her eyes. Maybe it was the worn clothing. Maybe it was something Sarah wouldn't admit even to herself. She'd watched as Monica had moved through the aisles slowly, picking up items, checking prices, putting some back. Typical behavior for a budget-conscious shopper, but through the lens of Sarah's recent training on identifying suspicious behavior, it looked like something else. Like someone casing the store. Like someone calculating what they could conceal. When Lily had wandered away from her mother to look at a display of stuffed animals, Sarah had tensed. Using children as distractions or accomplices, the training video had warned. A common tactic. Marcus, the checkout clerk, had noticed his manager's intense focus and had felt uncomfortable. At 17, Marcus was perceptive enough to see that something was off about the way Sarah was watching this particular customer. He'd seen her watch other customers before, but this felt different, more intense, more prejudged. "You okay, Ms. Chen?" he'd asked during a lull. "Just doing my job," Sarah had replied, her eyes never leaving Monica. "Stay alert." Marcus had swallowed his unease. He needed this job. His family needed this job. Whatever was happening, he told himself it wasn't his business. Meanwhile, Monica had been completely unaware of the surveillance. Her mind was elsewhere, with her mother, with her empty bank account, with the job applications she'd sent out that week with no responses. She'd been mentally calculating. Bread, $2. Peanut butter, $4. Could she afford the jam? Yes. The milk was on sale, thank God. Eggs, checking the dates to find the longest expiration. Bananas, the cheapest fruit. At one point, overwhelmed by exhaustion and worry, Monica had stopped in the canned goods aisle, leaning against a shelf for just a moment, her eyes closed. Just a moment to breathe, to center herself. To not think about hospital rooms and medical bills, and the fact that she'd probably have to sell her car soon if she didn't find work. Sarah had interpreted this moment differently. Suspicious behavior. Concealment activity. Someone hiding something. The degradation continued when Monica had shifted her purse from one shoulder to the other, a simple adjustment of weight that Sarah read as making room for concealed items. When Lily had returned to her mother's side and tugged on her sleeve, saying something too quiet for Sarah to hear, the store manager had been certain she was witnessing a planned theft in progress. "Should I call security?" Marcus had whispered when Sarah moved closer to his register. "No," Sarah had replied, her voice tight. "I've got this. I'm going to handle it personally." The truth was, Morrison's grocery didn't have security guards. They had cameras, sensors, and Sarah Chen's determination to protect her store and her career at any cost. By the time Monica had approached the checkout lane, Sarah had constructed an entire narrative in her mind. This woman was a shoplifter. She was certain of it. Years of experience, she told herself. Instinct. Training. She'd seen all the signs. What she hadn't seen was the receipt clutched in Monica's hand, a receipt from the pharmacy 2 doors down, where she'd just bought her mother's prescription medication, an expense that had taken the last of her credit card's available balance. What she hadn't seen was the way Lily kept looking up at her mother with concern, noticing the stressed lines around Monica's eyes, the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. What she hadn't seen was her own bias at work, the way she'd tracked this customer more closely than others, the way she'd interpreted innocent actions through a lens of suspicion. Monica had placed her items on the conveyor belt and Marcus had begun scanning them. Bread, peanut butter, jam, eggs, milk, bananas, $32.17. That's when Sarah had stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am, I need to speak with you." Monica had looked up, confused. "Is something wrong?" "I need you to step aside, please. Bring your bag." My bag?" Monica had glanced down at her purse, then back at Sarah. "I don't understand." Marcus had stopped scanning, his hand frozen over the milk carton. Other customers in line had begun to notice. Whispers started. "Ma'am, I've been watching you and I have reason to believe you've concealed merchandise." The words hit Monica like a physical blow. Her eyes widened. "What? No, please don't make a scene. Just come with me to the office and we can sort this out." "I haven't taken anything." Monica's voice rose, not with anger but with panic. This couldn't be happening, not now, not on top of everything else. Lily had gripped her mother's hand tighter, her notebook pressed against her chest. "Mommy didn't take anything," she'd said, her small voice barely audible. "Honey, it's okay." Monica had tried to reassure her daughter while her own world was spinning. "There's just been a misunderstanding." But Sarah Chen, convinced of her assessment, certain that she was preventing a theft and protecting her store, had been unmovable. "If you haven't taken anything, then you won't mind showing me the contents of your bag." This is humiliating," Monica had whispered, aware of all the eyes on her, all the phones now pointed in her direction. "It's store policy," Sarah had insisted, though it wasn't, not really. The actual policy required reasonable cause and the involvement of actual security personnel, neither of which Sarah had. That's when Monica had tried to leave, not to run, not to escape, but simply to extract herself and her daughter from this nightmare. She'd grabbed Lily's hand and turned toward the door, abandoning her groceries, her dignity in tatters. And that's when Sarah had raised her voice, transforming a tense situation into a public accusation. "I need you to leave. Now." Part 4, Discovery Phase. The standoff lasted perhaps 30 seconds, though it felt like hours to everyone involved. Monica stood frozen, her daughter's hand in hers, facing a store manager whose face was flushed with righteousness and certainty. Around them, a semicircle of spectators had formed, some holding phones, others simply watching, all of them making judgments. Then a voice from the back of the gathering crowd. "Hey, isn't that— wait a minute." An older black woman pushed through the onlookers. She was perhaps 60, wearing scrubs decorated with cartoon characters, a pediatric nurse from the hospital. Her name tag read Janice Porter, RN. Monica Williams?" Janice's face showed recognition and concern. "Honey, what's going on?" Monica's eyes filled with tears at the familiar face, at the kindness in a moment of cruelty. "Ms. Porter, this doesn't concern you," Sarah interjected, her authority challenged. "This is a store matter." Janice fixed Sarah with a look that had silenced unruly residents and arrogant doctors alike. "I'm making it my concern. This woman has been at County General for 3 days straight, sitting with her dying mother. She hasn't slept, barely eaten, and you're accusing her of what exactly? Of shoplifting, Sarah said, but something in her voice wavered. I saw her behaving suspiciously. You saw an exhausted woman trying to buy food for her child. Janice cut her off. I saw her in the hospital cafeteria this morning. She gave her breakfast sandwich to a homeless man who wandered in. Said she wasn't hungry, but I knew she was just being kind. That's who this woman is. The crowd's energy shifted. Phone cameras remained pointed, but the narrative was changing, rewriting itself in real time. Marcus, the checkout clerk, found his voice. Ms. Chen, all her items are still here. She didn't take anything. I scanned everything, and she was about to pay. Sarah's certainty began to crack. But I saw her. She was acting. I was trained to look for what? Another voice joined in. This time it was Jennifer Kim, a regular customer, a Korean-American woman in a business suit who'd been in line behind Monica. For people who look a certain way, for people whose clothes aren't expensive enough, for people you've already decided are guilty. That's not what this is, Sarah protested, but even she could hear how hollow it sounded. Lily, who had been silent through all of this, suddenly spoke up, her voice small but clear. My mommy helps people. I write it all down. She held up her notebook, opening it to a random page. Her hands shook, but she read, June 8, Mommy stopped to help a man whose car broke down. We were late to my recital, but she said helping people matters more than being on time. Another page. May 15, Mommy found a wallet at the park with $100 in it. She tracked down the owner and gave it back. The lady tried to give her a reward, but Mommy said no thank you. Lily kept reading, her voice growing stronger. April 29, Mommy donated her interview suit to a lady at the shelter who needed it for a job interview. Mommy said she'd find another one, but I know it was her only nice suit. With each entry, Sarah Chen's face grew paler. Around them, the atmosphere had completely transformed. What had been suspicion toward Monica became something else: recognition of injustice, anger at a false accusation, and a pointed examination of the store manager who'd created this situation. An elderly white man who'd been watching spoke up, his voice gruff. I've been shopping here for 30 years. I've seen you watch folks in this store, and I've noticed who you watch closest. Maybe it's time someone else noticed too. That's enough, Sarah tried to regain control. Everyone needs to give us some space. No. Monica's voice cut through, clear and strong for the first time. She was still shaking, still terrified, but something in Lily's defense of her had straightened her spine. No more space, no more silence. You humiliated me in front of my daughter, in front of all these people, because you decided I was a thief. You didn't ask questions. You didn't check facts. You just saw. What did you see when you looked at me? Sarah couldn't answer. Because answering truthfully would require admitting things about herself she'd never acknowledged. I saw, Sarah started, then stopped. I was trained to identify suspicious behavior. And what made my behavior suspicious? Monica pressed. Taking time to read prices, adjusting my purse, resting for a moment because I'm exhausted from 3 days in a hospital watching my mother have a stroke, or was it something else, something you won't say out loud? The silence was crushing. Everyone knew what Monica was asking. Everyone understood what remained unspoken. Marcus, the teenage clerk, surprised himself by speaking. Ms. Chen, I've worked here for 2 years. Last week, a white lady in yoga pants walked out with a bottle of wine she forgot to pay for. She came back 20 minutes later to pay for it. You laughed it off, said it happens. But you didn't follow her. You didn't accuse her. You just trusted her. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the store. She saw herself reflected in their gazes, not as the vigilant manager protecting her store, but as something else entirely. Something she'd never wanted to be. She struggled for words. I was doing my job. No, Janice Porter said gently but firmly. You were doing something else, and I think you know it. Part 5, set up the moment crystallized, all the pieces falling into position for what would come next. Sarah Chen stood at a crossroads, though she didn't fully realize it yet. Behind her, literally and figuratively, was everything she'd built. Her career, her identity as a successful manager, her carefully constructed sense of herself as someone who played by the rules and did things right. Before her stood Monica Williams and her daughter, representing an uncomfortable mirror. And surrounding them all, a community of witnesses who would remember this moment and what she chose to do next. Jennifer Kim, the woman in the business suit, pulled out her phone not to record but to make a call. Yes, I'd like to speak to David Morrison. This is Jennifer Kim, corporate counsel for Harrison and Lee. I'm currently at your Morrison's grocery location on 5th Street, witnessing what appears to be racial profiling of a customer. Sarah's blood ran cold. Corporate counsel. David Morrison, her regional manager. The same man who'd pressured her about shrinkage and loss prevention. The same man whose approval she'd been desperately seeking. Wait, Sarah said, her hand up. There's every need, Jennifer replied coolly. I'm a civil rights attorney, Ms. Chen. What I'm witnessing here is potentially actionable. Unless something changes very quickly, you and this store are looking at serious legal consequences. Marcus watched his manager's face cycle through emotions. Denial, fear, anger, and something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. He thought about his own family, his black father, his Mexican mother, the stories they'd told him about moments like this. He thought about the times he'd stayed silent when he should have spoken. Ms. Chen, he said quietly, my dad taught me something. He said, Marcus, the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, it's what they do when they realize they've made one. The words hung in the air. This was Sarah's moment, the setup for everything that would follow. She could dig in, defend her actions, cite her training and her policies and her 14 years of experience. She could call her regional manager herself, frame the narrative, protect her position, or she could do something else entirely. Lily, still holding her notebook, looked up at her mother. Mommy, are you okay? Monica knelt down, eye level with her daughter, aware of everyone watching but focused only on Lily. I'm okay, baby. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Sometimes people judge without knowing the whole story. Like when Tommy said I was lying about our adventures. Exactly like that, and do you remember what we did? We showed him my notebook, we showed him the truth. That's right. Monica stood back up, her hand on Lily's shoulder. She looked directly at Sarah. The truth, that's all any of us need, isn't it? The truth about who we are, what we've done, and what we're going to do next. The parking lot outside the store's front windows had started to fill. Word had spread on social media, because of course it had, because everything spreads on social media now. People were gathering, some who'd seen the initial post, some who'd heard from friends, some who simply recognized the shape of injustice and felt compelled to witness. Inside the store, the regional manager's assistant had called back. Jennifer Kim's phone rang, and she answered. Yes, Mom, I see. And is he aware that this is being recorded by multiple witnesses? That it's already on social media? That the woman being accused is the daughter of Evelyn Williams, who some of us know as the woman who cleaned offices in this community for 40 years and never had a bad word to say about anyone? Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Evelyn Williams. The name sounded familiar, and then, oh God, she remembered. Evelyn Williams had cleaned the Morrisons' corporate offices. Sarah had met her once years ago when Sarah was still a checkout clerk. She remembered a kind woman with worn hands who'd stopped to help Sarah pick up a display she'd accidentally knocked over. I remember your mother, Sarah said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. She was kind to me, once, when I was new and scared of being fired for breaking something. Monica's expression didn't soften. She was kind to everyone, it's who she is. Who she still is, lying in a hospital bed right now, maybe dying. The crack in Sarah's armor widened. I didn't know, you didn't ask, you didn't look beyond what you assumed you saw. Janice Porter stepped closer to Monica, a gesture of solidarity and support. Honey, what do you need? What would make this right? It was a question that put all the power in Monica's hands, power that Sarah had tried to strip from her minutes before. The setup was complete. Every person in that store, every person gathering outside, every person who would later watch the videos and read the accounts, they were all waiting to see what happened next. Would Monica demand punishment? Would she press charges? Would she accept an apology if one was offered? Would Sarah even offer one? The climactic moment approached like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and transformative. Marcus quietly canceled Monica's transaction and then, on impulse, began rescanning her items. The beeps of the scanner created a rhythmic punctuation to the tension. What are you doing? Sarah asked. My job, Marcus replied simply. This customer was trying to make a purchase. She was interrupted. I'm helping her complete that purchase. It was a small act of rebellion, a choice to side with justice over authority. It was also an invitation, a final chance for Sarah to choose a different path. The total appeared on the register, $32.17. Monica reached for her wallet with shaking hands, but Jennifer Kim stepped forward. Please, let me. She held out her credit card. No, Monica said firmly. Thank you, but no, I can pay for my groceries. I've always paid for what I take, always. The emphasis on the last word was deliberate, a final assertion of dignity. She counted out her bills and change, exact to the penny. Marcus bagged her items carefully, adding an extra bag for strength. I'm sorry, he whispered as he handed her the bags. I should have said something sooner. Monica met his eyes, saw the genuine regret there, and nodded. You said something when it mattered, that's what counts. This was the moment. The setup was complete. All the pieces were in position. What happened next would define everyone involved for years to come. Part 6, Climactic Reversal. Sarah Chen stood in the eye of a hurricane of her own making, and in that moment, something inside her broke, not her spirit, but the careful walls she'd built around uncomfortable truths. She looked at Monica Williams, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not a threat to her career, but a person she'd harmed. Stop! The word came out barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder. Everyone, please stop. The murmuring crowd quieted. Monica, her bags in hand, had been about to leave, to walk out of the store and out of this nightmare. She paused but didn't turn around. Ms. Williams, Monica, please, I need. Sarah's voice cracked. I need to say something, and I need everyone here to hear it because they witnessed what I did and they deserve to witness what happens next. Monica turned slowly. Her face was exhausted, drawn, but there was strength in her eyes, the kind of strength that comes from surviving things that should break a person but somehow don't. Sarah took a deep breath. 14 years in retail management, thousands of customer interactions, hundreds of difficult conversations, and none of them had prepared her for this moment. Because this wasn't about policy or procedure. This was about something much more fundamental, accountability. I profiled you. The words came out stark and honest. I watched you from the moment you entered the store, and I watched you differently than I watch other customers. I told myself I was doing my job, following my training, protecting my store. But that's a lie, or at least it's not the whole truth. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. This was the reversal, the moment when the person with all the power admitted to misusing it. I was trained to look for suspicious behavior, yes. But the training didn't make me focus on you specifically. That was my choice, my bias, my prejudice. Sarah's voice strengthened even as tears began to form in her eyes. I saw a tired black woman in worn clothes, and somewhere in my mind, in a place I've never wanted to acknowledge, I made assumptions. I judged you. I decided you were a threat before you'd done a single thing wrong. Monica remained silent, but Lily squeezed her hand. The little girl's notebook was still clutched in her other hand, evidence of truths that Sarah had been blind to. When you tried to leave, it should have confirmed that you hadn't taken anything. But I was so convinced I was right, so invested in my narrative, that I doubled down. I humiliated you. I scared your daughter. I turned my bias into a public accusation. Sarah's voice dropped. And the worst part is, I've probably done this before. Maybe not as obviously, maybe not to this extreme, but I've watched people differently based on how they look, and I told myself it was just good management. Jennifer Kim's phone was recording now, but Sarah didn't care. Some things needed to be documented. You asked me what I saw when I looked at you, Sarah continued, speaking directly to Monica. I saw my own fears and prejudices reflected back at me. I saw someone I decided fit a certain profile, but I didn't see you. I didn't see a woman who just spent 3 days in a hospital with her mother. I didn't see someone who gives her food to homeless people and returns lost wallets and donates her clothes to those who need them. I didn't see a mother who's raised a daughter who documents kindness in a notebook because she wants to remember all the good in the world. Sarah wiped her eyes. I didn't see any of that because I'd already decided what story I was going to tell about you. And that is inexcusable. The silence in the store was profound. This was vulnerability of a kind that rarely happened in public, especially from someone in authority. This was the kind of admission that changes things. Ms. Williams, I cannot undo what I did. I cannot take back the humiliation or the fear or the injustice of this moment, but I can do 3 things. Sarah held up 3 fingers like a child making a promise. First, I apologize, fully, completely, with no qualifications or excuses. I am deeply, profoundly sorry for what I did to you and your daughter. Lily whispered something to her mother. Monica bent down, and Lily said, louder this time, she sounds like she means it. Second, Sarah continued, I will not hide from this. I won't delete the videos or suppress the story or pretend this didn't happen. What I did needs to be seen and remembered because that's the only way we change. That's the only way I change. And third, Monica asked, her voice neutral, not giving anything away. Third, I will step down as manager of this store, effective immediately. The crowd gasped. This was not what anyone had expected, not the protesters gathering outside, not the corporate attorney recording everything, not Marcus, who'd worked under Sarah for 2 years, and certainly not Monica. That's not Monica started, but Sarah held up a hand. It's necessary, not as punishment, though I deserve that. But because I need to take time to really examine my biases, to get educated, to become someone who doesn't make these mistakes. I can't do that while trying to save my career. I need to save myself first, become better first. Sarah looked around at all the witnesses. I'm going to contact NAACP and ask for their help. I'm going to do real anti-bias training, not the corporate kind. I'm going to do the work that I should have been doing all along. She turned back to Monica. You owe me nothing, not forgiveness, not understanding, nothing. But I want you to know that your story, your truth, changed me today. Your daughter's notebook full of kindness changed me. You holding on to your dignity when I tried to strip it away changed me." Monica stood very still for a long moment. The entire store held its breath. Then she spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the silence. "My mother taught me something. She said that the world tries to make us small, tries to make us bitter, tries to make us cruel in response to cruelty. But she said the real power is in staying kind, staying truthful, and giving people a chance to be better than they've been." Monica paused. "I'm tired, I'm hurt, I'm angry, but I'm also my mother's daughter, so I'm going to say this. I hear your apology. I see that you mean it. And I hope you do the work you say you're going to do, because the next person who walks into your store or any store deserves better than what I got today." It wasn't absolution, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was grace, the grace of a woman who refused to let injustice turn her into someone less than who she was. Sarah nodded, tears streaming freely now. "Thank you for that, Grace. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful for it." Then Lily did something remarkable. She walked forward, her small purple backpack bouncing, her butterfly notebook in hand, and she stood in front of Sarah Chen. At 8 years old, she looked up at the store manager who'd frightened her and said, "I'm going to write about this in my notebook, about what happened, but also about what happened after, because the after matters too." The wisdom of a child cutting through complexity to simple truth. What matters is not just the wrong we do, but what we do after we've been confronted with our wrong. Sarah knelt down to Lily's level. "You're right, the after matters. Thank you for reminding me of that." Janice Porter, who'd been watching everything unfold, stepped forward. "Monica, honey, you should go be with your mama, go rest. These groceries aren't enough to feed you both properly for the week, and you're going to need your strength." Before Monica could protest, Janice had pulled out her own wallet. "Marcus, dear, would you please ring up some additional items? We're going to make sure this family has what they need." "I can't accept," Monica started. "You can and you will," Janice said firmly. "Community takes care of community. That's not charity, that's how we survive." Jennifer Kim added her own card, "For anything else they need." The elderly white man who'd spoken earlier pulled out a $20 bill. "For the little one, buy her something nice." Suddenly, there was a movement through the store. People were contributing, not out of pity, but out of solidarity, out of recognition that something broken needed to be made right by collective action. Within minutes, there were hundreds of dollars collected. Marcus, tears running down his own face, began gathering items: fresh fruit, vegetables, chicken, pasta, real coffee, ice cream for Lily. He filled 3 carts while the community that had gathered continued to contribute. "This is too much," Monica whispered, overwhelmed. "It's not enough," Janice replied. "Not for what you've been through, not for what your mother has been through all these years, cleaning our offices and our buildings and making spaces better for all of us." Sarah watched all of this, seeing how a community could respond to injustice, not just with anger or protest, but with tangible support for those who'd been harmed. It was a lesson in itself. "Ms. Williams," Sarah said quietly, "the store will deliver these to your home at no charge, and—" She pulled out a Morrison's gift card from behind the customer service desk, one of the $500 cards they kept for special circumstances. She added it to the pile of money. "This is from me, personally, not from the store, from the person who wronged you." Monica looked at the card, at the money, at the carts full of groceries, at all these people, strangers minutes ago, who'd chosen to stand with her. She looked at her daughter, who was carefully writing something in her notebook. "Lily, what are you writing?" Monica asked. Lily looked up, her face serious. "I'm writing. Today was really hard and really scary, but then people were kind. Mommy says we have to remember the kindness too, especially on the hard days. Today showed me that even when bad things happen, people can choose to be good after." The words from a child who just witnessed her mother being publicly accused and humiliated, who then seen that same person apologize and a community rally in support, captured the complexity and hope of the moment. "Can I read what I wrote about you?" Lily asked Sarah shyly. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Lily flipped to a new page, the ink still fresh. "September 30, a lady made a big mistake and was mean to Mommy, but then she said she was sorry and said why it was wrong. She cried real tears. She's going to work on being better. Mommy says that's what matters most, that people can change if they really want to. Simple, childlike, and absolutely devastating in its honest assessment of redemption." Part 7, resolution. 1 month later, Monica Williams sat in a hospital room, but this time her mother was awake, sitting up, speech still slurred from the stroke, but mind sharp and present. "Tell it again," Evelyn said, her words slow but determined. "About the store." Monica had told the story several times now. Each time her mother listened with those wise eyes that had seen so much in 64 years of life, and each time she asked Monica how she felt about what had happened. "I'm still angry sometimes," Monica admitted. "When I think about how scared Lily was, how public it was, how it could have gone so much worse, yeah, I'm angry." "But," Evelyn prompted, knowing her daughter well, "but I also saw something I needed to see. I saw that speaking truth matters. I saw a community come together. I saw that even someone who'd wronged us could face it honestly. And I saw my daughter take away a lesson about accountability and change that I could never have taught her in 1,000 words." Lily, coloring in the corner of the room, looked up. "Miss Sarah emailed again. She wants to know if I'll let her read my notebook when she comes to visit." Sarah Chen had been emailing weekly since the incident, not asking for forgiveness or closure, but sharing what she'd been learning. She'd enrolled in a legitimate anti-bias training program through a local university. She'd begun attending community meetings where people of color discussed their experiences. She'd been volunteering at an organization that helped formerly incarcerated people find jobs, learning, as she said, about how assumptions destroy opportunities. She'd also lost her job, but not because she'd been fired. She'd kept her word and resigned. David Morrison, the regional manager, had actually called her and offered her a path to return, a PR move to show accountability and growth. Sarah had declined. "I need to earn my way back," she'd told him. "Not PR my way back. There's a difference." Marcus, the teenage clerk, had been promoted to assistant manager. He'd used his new platform to implement actual policies about customer interactions and bias prevention. Morrison's grocery had become a case study, not in how to handle PR disasters, but in genuine institutional change. "Is Miss Sarah still coming next week?" Lily asked. "If you want her to," Monica replied. "You don't have to see her, baby. What happened wasn't your responsibility to fix." "I know, but she's trying really hard to be better." "And you said people deserve chances to show they've changed." Monica smiled at her daughter's generous spirit. "I did say that, and I meant it." The truth was, Monica had been wrestling with her own lessons from that day. It would have been easier to hold on to anger, to refuse engagement, to write off Sarah Chen as irredeemable. But her mother had taught her something different, that denying someone the chance to change was sometimes just another form of cruelty. That didn't mean trust came easy. It didn't mean the harm was forgotten. It meant that growth was possible if someone did the genuine work. At a coffee shop across town, Sarah Chen sat across from Dr. James Patterson, a psychologist who specialized in implicit bias training. They'd been meeting weekly for the past month. "Tell me about the incident again," he said. "But this time, tell me about the moments before you confronted her. What were you feeling?" Sarah had learned that true change required uncomfortable honesty. "I was feeling powerful, in control, like I was finally doing something right after weeks of feeling like I wasn't enough. My boss had been pressuring me about losses, and I thought catching a shoplifter would prove I was on top of things." "And what do you feel when you think about that now?" "Shame. Horror that I used another human being as a tool to prove myself to my boss, that I was willing to hurt someone to make myself feel competent." "What else?" This was the harder part. "Relief that I got caught. That sounds wrong, but it's true. If no one had said anything, if the community hadn't responded, I might have convinced myself I'd done the right thing. I might have continued profiling people without ever confronting what I was doing." Dr. Patterson nodded. "Privilege often allows people to avoid consequences for their biases. You're experiencing something rare, accountability. That's uncomfortable, but it's necessary for change." Sarah had learned about implicit bias, about how society conditions certain associations, about structural racism versus individual acts. She'd learned that saying, "I'm not racist," wasn't enough if her actions had racist impacts. She'd learned about intersectionality, about how poverty and race combine to make someone like Monica even more vulnerable to assumptions and profiling. She'd also learned that beating herself up forever wasn't the point. The point was to do better, be better, and help create systems that made it harder for others to make the same mistakes. "I want to go back to retail eventually," Sarah admitted. "But not as a manager. I want to work at the ground level again. Remember what it's like to be the person without power, to be watched, to be vulnerable. I think I forgot that along the way." "That's growth," Dr. Patterson said. "Recognizing that sometimes you need to step back to move forward." 2 months after the incident, Morrison's Grocery held a community forum. It was packed with customers, employees, community activists, and people who'd seen the videos online and wanted to be part of the conversation. Monica was there, along with Lily and Evelyn, who'd been released from the hospital but was still in recovery. Marcus was there, now actively involved in training new employees on equitable customer service. Jennifer Kim attended as an observer, ready to hold the company accountable for their promises. And Sarah Chen was there, not at the front but in the middle of the crowd, participating as a community member rather than an authority figure. The conversation was honest, sometimes uncomfortable. People shared their own stories of being profiled, followed, or accused. White customers acknowledged the privileges they'd never questioned, like being able to browse without suspicion, to be given the benefit of the doubt, to have mistakes treated as mistakes rather than character judgments. At one point, a young black man stood up. "I stopped shopping at Morrison's 2 years ago because I was tired of being watched. What's different now? Why should I believe anything has changed?" Marcus, standing near the front, answered, "Because I'm going to personally make sure things change. We've implemented new policies. All employees now go through real anti-bias training, not the corporate checkbox kind. We've created a customer advocacy board with rotating community members who can bring complaints directly to corporate. We're partnering with local organizations to do better. But honestly, you're right to be skeptical. We have to prove it through action, not just words." Lily raised her small hand. When called on, she stood on her chair so everyone could see her. "I think people make mistakes, but I also think people can learn. My notebook has lots of stories about second chances, but—" She paused, thinking carefully. "You have to actually change, not just say you're going to." The wisdom of a child once again cutting through complexity. Near the end of the forum, Monica stood to speak. The room quieted. "What happened to me was wrong. It was hurtful, humiliating, and rooted in bias. But here's what I want everyone to remember. This isn't just about one incident or one person. It's about systems. It's about how we train people to view others. It's about what society teaches us about who's trustworthy and who's suspicious." She looked around the room. "Yes, Sarah Chen profiled me, but she was also following training that told her to watch for suspicious behavior without ever examining what makes behavior seem suspicious to her. The company pressured her to reduce shrinkage without thinking about how that pressure might manifest. She made a terrible choice, but she was making it within a system designed to produce exactly these kinds of outcomes." Monica's voice strengthened. "So yes, individuals need to do the work. Sarah's doing it. But we all need to examine the systems we're part of, the assumptions we make, the ways we've stayed silent when we witnessed injustice. That's the real lesson here." After the forum ended, Sarah approached Monica hesitantly. They'd communicated via email, but this was the first time they'd been face-to-face since that day. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said quietly, "and for what you said about systems. You're right, and it's generous of you to acknowledge that when you're the one who was harmed." "It's not about being generous," Monica replied. "It's about being honest. Yes, you hurt me. But I also know that hurt didn't originate with you. You were just the person who inflicted it. If we want real change, we have to go deeper than individual apologies." Lily appeared between them, her notebook under her arm. "Miss Sarah, I brought my notebook. You said you wanted to read it." Sarah knelt down to Lily's level. "Only if you want to share it. It's your private thoughts. Mommy says that sharing our stories is how we help people understand each other better." Lily opened the notebook to a page marked with a ribbon. "This is from before, when I was just writing about good things. But now I write about hard things too, because life has both." She showed Sarah entries from before the incident, stories of Monica's kindness, of their small adventures, of the ways they found joy despite financial struggles. Then she showed Sarah entries from after about learning that people can make mistakes, about communities coming together, about the importance of speaking truth. "You're in here now too," Lily said, showing Sarah a page. "It says, Miss Sarah made a mistake but then did the hard work of admitting it and changing. Mommy says that takes courage. I think she's brave for being honest about being wrong." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. That's more kindness than I deserve, Lily." "Maybe," Lily said with the frank honesty of children. "But Mommy says we give people the kindness we hope they'll pass on to others, like a circle." 6 months after the incident, Monica Williams started a new job, an actual position in social work at a community center, helping families navigate systems that often seemed designed to work against them. The job didn't pay as much as she'd hoped, but it paid enough. And it meant something. Evelyn had recovered enough to move back to her apartment, with visiting nurses checking in regularly. She liked to tell the nurses about her daughter, about her granddaughter with the notebook, about how proud she was of the way Monica had handled that difficult situation at the store. She could have been bitter, Evelyn told anyone who would listen. She had every right, but she chose grace instead. That's my girl. Lily's notebook had grown thick with entries. It had become something more than a personal diary. It had become a testament to a child's understanding that life contained both cruelty and kindness, that people could fail and grow, that truth-telling mattered. She'd started a blog with Monica's help and supervision called Lily's Notebook, Stories About Kindness and Truth. It had thousands of followers, people drawn to a child's honest perspective on difficult topics. One entry particularly resonated with readers. Some people ask me if I'm mad at Miss Sarah. I was at first. She scared me and made my mommy cry. But I'm not mad anymore. Here's what I learned: everybody messes up sometimes, even grown-ups, even people who think they're doing the right thing. What matters is what you do after. Do you say, "I'm sorry," and mean it? Do you work hard to change? Do you help other people not make the same mistake? Miss Sarah is doing all of that. So I think she's okay now. Not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but okay. Sarah Chen, now working part-time at a local bookstore while continuing her education and volunteer work, read Lily's blog regularly. Each entry was a reminder of why she was doing this work, why it mattered, why she couldn't give up on becoming better. She'd started her own blog too, documenting her journey of unlearning bias. It was uncomfortable, often painful, to share her failures and revelations publicly. But she'd learned that discomfort was necessary, that growth rarely happened in safe spaces. One of her posts read, "Today marks 6 months since I profiled Monica Williams and publicly humiliated her. 6 months of doing the hardest work I've ever done, not the work of rebuilding a career, but the work of rebuilding myself. I've learned that I was never not racist, just because I didn't say slurs or join hate groups. I was racist in my assumptions, my fears, my internalized beliefs about who was trustworthy and who was threatening. And I was able to maintain those beliefs because I had the privilege of not having to examine them. That ends now. Not because I've figured it all out, I haven't and probably never will completely, but because I'm committed to the ongoing work of being better." Marcus, now 21 and the assistant manager at Morrison's, had become a voice for change within the company. He'd helped implement new hiring practices, new training programs, and new ways of thinking about security that didn't rely on profiling. "The thing is," he told a group of new employees during orientation, "we can create systems that make it easier for people to do the right thing. We can create cultures where questioning bias is encouraged, not punished. We can choose to see every customer as deserving respect first, suspicion never, unless they actually do something wrong." Paused, then added, "And even then we handle it with dignity, because the way we treat people reflects who we are, not who they are." 1 year after the incident, Monica, Lily, and Evelyn stood together outside Morrison's grocery. They'd been invited to a ceremony marking the store's new community partnership programs, initiatives that had grown out of that fateful evening. Inside, there was a new display, Community Voices, featuring stories from customers and employees about their experiences. Lily's notebook entries were featured, as were reflections from others who'd witnessed or been impacted by the incident. And there was a plaque that read, "In recognition that systems and individuals must both change for justice to flourish, may we always choose accountability over comfort, growth over defensiveness, and community over division." Sarah Chen stood near the back of the crowd gathered for the ceremony. She wasn't on the program. This wasn't about her redemption arc. She was there simply as a community member, a witness to change she'd helped catalyze through her failure and subsequent growth. When Monica spotted her, she walked over. They'd maintained a cordial relationship over the year, not exactly friends, but something else. Two people connected by a difficult moment who'd both chosen to grow from it. "Thank you for coming," Monica said. "Thank you for allowing it," Sarah replied. "For not demanding I disappear forever, which would have been understandable." "My mother taught me something," Monica said, gesturing to Evelyn, who was chatting animatedly with Janice Porter nearby. "She said that people who have genuinely faced their wrongs and done the work to change deserve to be part of the community's healing, not centered in it. This isn't your redemption story to claim, but part of it." Sarah nodded, understanding the distinction. "I'm still working on it, every day. Learning to see my privilege, to check my assumptions, to notice when I'm falling into old patterns. It's exhausting sometimes." "Good," Monica said, not unkindly. "It should be exhausting. That's how you know you're doing actual work rather than performing growth." Lily ran up, her notebook now joined by several others. She'd filled 3 since that day. "Mommy, Miss Janice wants to take a picture of everyone for her office. She says we're all part of a story worth remembering." They gathered for the photo. Monica and Lily and Evelyn, Janice and Jennifer, Marcus and some of the other employees, community members who'd been part of the response, and yes, Sarah too, not in the front but included. The photo captured something important, that justice wasn't just about punishment or even redemption. It was about communities choosing to heal together, about creating space for both accountability and growth, about refusing to let one person's failure define everyone's future. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Lily tugged on Monica's sleeve. "Mommy, can I read the newest thing I wrote? The thing for today?" Monica nodded, and Lily climbed onto a chair so everyone could hear. "This is from my notebook from last night," Lily began. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened a year ago, and here's what I think now. That day was terrible. I was so scared. My mommy was hurt. It wasn't fair. But here's the thing, that day also showed me that when bad things happen, people can choose how to respond. Some people got angry at Miss Sarah. Some people supported my mommy. Some people tried to make it right." She flipped a page. "And Miss Sarah, she could have just said sorry and moved on, but she didn't. She did the hard work. She changed. And that taught me something important. Mistakes don't have to be the end of the story. They can be the beginning of a better story if we're brave enough to face them." Lily looked around at all the assembled people. "My mommy teaches me that there are two kinds of people in the world, people who make mistakes and pretend they didn't, and people who make mistakes and work to be better. The second kind of people, those are my heroes, because it's way harder to admit you were wrong than to pretend you were right." She closed her notebook. "I think that's what this whole year has been about. Not about one bad day, but about all the days after when people chose to be better. That's the story I want to remember. That's the story I want to tell." There was a long moment of silence, then applause, not performative or excessive, but genuine. Because an 8-year-old had just articulated what many adults struggled to express. That grace and accountability aren't opposites, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, and that real change is measured not in apologies but in sustained effort. As people began to leave, Sarah approached Lily one more time. "Thank you for including me in the better story," she said quietly. "I know I didn't earn that." Lily thought about this seriously, then said, "You're earning it every day. That's how it works. You don't earn it once and get to keep it forever. You have to keep choosing to be better. That's what makes it real." Wisdom from a child. Again, Monica put her hand on her daughter's shoulder, proud beyond measure. "Ready to go, baby? Grandma's getting tired." As they walked to their car, a newer one thanks to Monica's steady job, Lily said, "Mommy, do you think Miss Sarah will be okay? Like really okay?" Monica thought about her response carefully. "I think Miss Sarah has a long journey ahead of her. Understanding our biases and changing how we see the world isn't something you do once and you're done. It's something you choose every day. But I think she's on the right path, and I think she understands now that the work is never really finished." "Good," Lily said, satisfied. "Because I want to keep writing good things in my notebook, and people trying to be better, that's worth writing about." That evening, as Monica tucked Lily into bed, her daughter asked, "Did we do the right thing, being nice to Miss Sarah after what she did?" Monica sat on the edge of the bed. "We weren't nice to her, baby. Being nice would mean pretending nothing bad happened. We held her accountable. We told the truth about what she did. But we also left room for her to change. There's a difference between being nice and being fair. We were fair. And fair is better. Fair is better. Fair means everyone gets what they need, consequences for harm, support for those who were hurt, and chances for those who genuinely want to change. All of those things at once." Lily nodded sleepily. "I'm going to write that down tomorrow, for my notebook." "Good idea, baby." As Monica closed the door, she thought about the past year. About pain and growth, about community and accountability, about how a terrible moment had somehow transformed into a teachable one. Not because the harm wasn't real, it absolutely was. But because enough people had chosen to respond to that harm with both anger and wisdom, both demands for justice and space for change. She thought about her mother, recovering in the next room, who'd spent a lifetime teaching these lessons through her actions. About how Evelyn had been kind to a young, scared store clerk named Sarah 10 years ago, kindness that Sarah had remembered, that had perhaps planted the first seed of her later accountability. The world was complicated. People were complicated. Justice was complicated. But some truths remained simple. Harm needed to be named. Accountability needed to be real. Change needed to be sustained. And communities needed to decide whether they would be places of punishment only or also places of growth. As you reflect on this story, consider these questions. When have you witnessed bias or profiling, and how did you respond? Are there times you stayed silent when you should have spoken up? What's the difference between genuine accountability and performative apology? How can we tell the difference? Is it possible to hold people accountable while also leaving room for them to change? What does that balance look like? How do we address systemic problems while also acknowledging individual responsibility? Can we do both at once? What role should community play in both calling out harm and supporting growth? If you've experienced discrimination or bias, what kind of response from the person who harmed you would feel meaningful? What would justice look like to you? And finally, what would it mean for each of us to do the work that Sarah Chen is doing, examining our own biases, challenging our assumptions, and choosing to be better than we were yesterday? These aren't easy questions. They don't have simple answers. But like Lily's notebook teaches us, the important stories aren't always the easy ones. They're the ones that challenge us to grow. If this story made you think, made you feel, or made you want to do better, share it. Talk about it. Let it start conversations that need to happen. Because change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we're brave enough to face uncomfortable truths and committed enough to do the work that comes after. Subscribe to stay connected with more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity. And share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson did you take from Monica and Lily's story? What would you do in Sarah's position? How do we as a community create spaces for both accountability and growth? Remember, like Lily wrote in her notebook, mistakes don't have to be the end of the story. They can be the beginning of a better one if we're brave enough to face them.